Back on the Yukon XL Duramax build. So this is a 2000 2500 Suburban frame. This is an 04 LLY in Allison. To put these on a Suburban frame, you got to swap the mounts, but the 2500 frames are all the same in the front, so those bolt right on. I put new engine mounts on. I've got a new transmission mount. The transmission cross member needs to be moved back. For the fuel lines, I leave the hard lines on the Duramax and Allison. I just cut the flex line off of the donor truck. Because there's not a 1/2-inch feed from the Suburban's gas tank, I'm going to put a sump in the bottom with a 1/2-inch line. I'll just run a hose and connect it here. That's what I did on my last one. Then for the return, I'll use the 3/8 feed from the tank, hook these together and take the pump out and use that 3/8 line as the return to the tank. Because these have two tanks, I don't want to use both pumps. That ends up being a problem for everybody on a Durabird build. So I'm going to put a sump in each tank and connect them together. That way this tank will drain as this one's draining. This being a pre-03 truck, this tail light harness is completely different. The ABS module is different, so I need to change those. I'm not sure what's going on with all this blue paint that the last guy did. I would love to completely strip this frame and paint it, but that's just a lot of unnecessary time, really. The frame's in really good shape. This is just some surface rust and dirt on it. I will at least roll this out and pressure wash it. I may paint the outer edges. You can't really see them with a Denali body and the running boards on it anyway, but I might paint most of the frame where I can. I'm going to rebuild the suspension and steering. I need to swap in the 373 front diff. All the 2500 diffs are the same size, but this Suburban had 410s and the Duramaxes all have 373s. Being a 6.0 Suburban, this has the non-floater 9.5-inch 14 bolt. The donor I'm using was a dually, so I'm not going to use the rear axle out of the dually, but I have one out of another truck I parted out. These bolt in the same. The only difference between the pickup axles and Suburban axles are the shock mounts. This one's bent. They are straight on the Suburban and they're angled on the pickup. So I need to weld new shock mounts on anyway, which is why I'm going to use this axle because it has the bent shock mount. I will pull this chrome bumper off to put the Denali bumper on. I'll take the shocks and axle out. I'll pull the front diff. I'll take off all of this ride height sensor stuff. I'm going to use the BCM out of the donor so that it'll work with the brake lines that I have. That way the Denali will no longer have ride height sensors or four-wheel traction control. I think that should work fine. You do have to change the steering shaft to do this because you need a 2-inch body lift and the original steering shaft on the Suburban is too short. So I'll use the one from the donor. I'm going to put a tapered body lift on this. It'll be 2 inches in the front, tapered back to nothing in the rear. The truck will sit pretty much level. I'll put the Duramax torsion bars in. If it sits a little high, I've got another one that's sitting on a 2500 chassis and it's a couple inches higher. If I don't like the way it sits, it might look good, those extra 2 inches taller. If it doesn't, I'll put some drop shackles in the rear and turn the torsion keys down to get it close to stock ride height when it was a 1500. This is a low mile engine and transmission. That transfer case is good. There's not much to address on this. I'm not going to delete EGR in case somebody who wants to buy this lives in a state where they need to pass emissions. A common thing on the Duramax is the transcooler lines leak. I'm not going to use stock transcooler lines because they'll just end up leaking anyway, so I'm going to upgrade those. I'll do maintenance stuff like all the filters, fuel filter, transmission filters, all the fluids. And I'll take this stock muffler out and I will cut down the exhaust off of my donor to fit this chassis. I don't want to put an aftermarket exhaust on it because where this is a Denali and it's going to probably be a family tow vehicle, I want it fairly quiet. So I will get that chassis prepped and then I will roll this in and pull the body and set it on the new chassis. This is the other one I started. I haven't pulled apart my donor for this. I was going to put an LBZ in it. Those plates are off my old one. This body could be a little cleaner though. I think rather than use this body, I'm just going to look for a cleaner one. So I'm actually going to put this body back on this 1500 frame and use the 6-liter and 4L80 that I have in this on that. Just make it a drivable 1500 with a 6-liter and 4L80. and I will look for a cleaner body to put on that chassis, maybe a Suburban Z71. Both the Denali and Z71 were never sold as 2500s. That's why I like the idea of putting them on a 2500 Suburban frame with a Duramax in them. So I will either look for a cleaner Denali or a cleaner Z71. Luckily, both of those are easy to find with bad transmissions, pretty cheap, so it shouldn't be too hard to find a clean body to put on that chassis.